All right, Mr. Crump, I would like to thank you for meeting with me today for this interview. Greatly appreciated. First question. Why did you attend the HBCU?
Honestly,
Yes.
well, I attended like NHBCU simply because it was the university at the time that was offering the most money to complete my undergraduate degree.
So your primary focus was actually financial, was it? It wasn't at all from.
Well, that's just the primary reason. Of course, I've had several individuals from my family to attend and graduate from Jackson State. I think everyone in my family, almost everyone in my family, has a degree at some level from Jackson State University. Bachelor's, specialist, a master's. So, yeah, I mean it's kind of a family lineage thing as well, but it's mostly because it was the university that was offering the most for my undergraduate degree.
All right. And What has your experience been thus far at the university?
Um, in what way? Or are you just talking about like good or bad, or?
Well, what are some of your most positive experiences you had while attending a HBCU? Could you tell a few of those?
Let's see. Positive experiences attending an HBCU. Um, I want to say that it might be fairly difficult to say like positive experiences strictly attending HBCU since I've not attended something commonly known as a PWI or any other type of university, so to speak. So it's sort of a one-sided kind of thing.
Well, then I would ask, what positive experience have you had at Jackson State?
Mm.
If that makes it a little better.
I've positive experiences. Um, while I was while I was here, I did get a chance to play. Um, Not necessarily during the inauguration, but as part of the inauguration festivities. Jackson State University was actually invited to play for the religious delegation um, during those festivities of the inauguration. As a matter of fact, while we were there, we ended up doing a 3 or 4 stop concert at I believe all three of the churches that President Barack Obama was considering attending in the DC area. We got a chance to play at each of those. Unfortunately, it wasn't in attendance, but it was actually a pretty good experience. We also did tours in Chicago as an orchestra, and the inauguration trip was probably the second time that we've been to DC as an orchestra or ensemble. So that was probably one of the more positive or happier memories that I've actually had while I was here.
All right, and back to you said that you couldn't really say what positive experience you had at HBCU because you haven't attended a PWI. But with that, have you when you applied to go to college, you thought about college choices other than for the financial reasons you came to Jackson State? Did you consider maybe going to PWI instead of HBCU?
I did. As a matter of fact,
Why is that?
why did I consider going?
To PWI rather than HBCU?
Because at the time, I think it was I was in this program where they would like kind of sort of Mensa esque, but not quite.
Can you explain what that is
Mensa.
necessarily?
Yeah, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
gonna lie. I totally forgot what the acronym stands for. But it's usually a school of thought or a group of individuals who possess exceptional intellects, and so they usually have them on like solving random math puzzles or solving relatively unsolvable math puzzles or higher thoughts in philosophy, etc. Brain teasers and puzzling and things like that. And so, because of certain things that happened earlier in my education, I was kind of pushed into such a program. Um, that being the case, Duke University at one point ended up having a talent search, and so I would always get these pamphlets and things, and who's who amongst like high school and college students, etc. So Duke was one of the first places that I actually considered going, um, as well as LSU, but that was pretty much only because it was really close to New Orleans. Dillard was kind of a tertiary choice as well, only because I had a sister who attended Dillard, and also it was in New Orleans. So
I understand. So do you think if you went to PWI instead of the HBCU that the experience would have been different in any way?
I want to say that it probably depends on the size of the PWI, but then again, typically when you're speaking of PWIs, the idea that they tend to be these really large, areas for students just kind of comes up. Number in the tens of thousands, sometimes. So that being the case, I do think that the educational experience might have been a little different. I've been told and or have had heard stories from others, people that I know who've been to PWIs, where the amount of attention that they've gotten due to the smaller classrooms or to the more family-like experience of HBCUs kind of disappears. You're not, addressed by your name, so to speak. It's more like you're actually
Okay, you can continue.
as I was saying, it's more like you're considered a number rather than just, an individual. So in that respect, I do believe that it's different attending an HBCU versus a PWI.
All right. And what do you feel are some of the challenges of attending an HBCU?
I want to say it depends a lot on the HBCU. A lot of it tends to be the fact that, or the idea that you're not necessarily prepared for the real world, quote unquote, when you actually leave an HBCU. It's almost seen, at least in the case of Jackson State, it's often referred to as the 13th grade. I know the idea in and of itself is ridiculous. Not necessarily what I've experienced on a lot of occasions here, but it's that notion that because Jackson State at least, and I can't really speak for other HBCUs. This is right in the middle of a cluster of other schools that kind of feed into it. It does feel like just a continuation of your education rather than an entirely new step or new direction in which you take your education. Within the areas, Jim Hill High School, Blackburn Middle School, Isabel, Hardy is less than 5 miles. Provine is less than 5 miles. Pecan Park probably also within the same distance. So these elementaries, high schools, middle schools kind of tend to feed into Jackson State. So it does feel like it's a continuation of an educational process, which to an extent it is, but it's not seen as anything new. It's not seen as you're kind of going out and kind of exploring, or you're coming to a newer understanding of what is expected of you as a student versus, okay, so this is what I did to get out of, high school. Let's just keep doing that.
All right, and do you feel as though you've experienced any disadvantages while attending an HBCU? What are your personal disadvantages that you may have had, or do you think you missed out on when attending?
Well, I wouldn't say that there would be necessarily extreme disadvantages as far as attending, an HBCU. That the same thing that happens here could probably just as well happen anywhere. You may run into a teacher who may know more or less in a particular subject. One of the problems that I'm kind of having right now is that what I would really love to write about as far as my thesis is concerned, I can't really write about because there's no one in the department who would really know what I was talking about. And so for the thesis to be really valid, somebody who knows just as much, if not more so than you do on a very particular subject, kind of has to be able to say, okay, no, I see where you're going with this. Let's pull the reins back. You need to correct this. That sort of idea. So that might be one of the disadvantages. But in actuality, I've probably had more advantages here due to some of the other personal experiences that I've had than disadvantages. One of which being I ran into a really good, well, as I said before, I was in the orchestra as well as the chamber ensemble here at Jackson State. And so in being a part of that, I ran into a really profound professor, Ms. Jordan, amazing violinist, right? So as a result of that, there were the trips to Washington, the tours to Chicago, and several other places, as well as, I believe, most recently, maybe a year ago, I'd say, we were invited to a conference in Daytona, Florida at Bethune-Cookman. So we got invited to that, and we got to play a piece by a composer named Adolphus Hailstork, who was taught by Natalie Boulanger. She's also the same person who taught Astor Piazzolla, Philip Glass, John Williams, all these like new age or 20th century composers that are kind of hot right now. So we got to perform a piece by Adolphus Hailstork, being conducted by Adolphus Hailstork, as well as the conference kind of wanting the JSU Chamber Ensemble to be the official chamber ensemble of the conference. So no matter where they were playing, we just have a trip there the following year just to go to a conference. So there have been some advantages, some really good things that have actually happened, but the advantages I don't feel have been really prominent.
And I know you said that one of the disadvantages of attending HBCU, Jackson State in particular, is people look at it as being the 13th grade. Why do you think educationally we look at HBCUs are looked at as education does not match up at other universities? Why do they seem like almost like the stepchild in education in a sense?
I think that problem kind of goes to a larger societal problem. I mean, racism has been on the surface, probably kind of washed away with the ebb and flow of time. But the institutional roots that it holds are still, and the social roots that it holds are still very much prominent today, just as they were when HBCUs were first started, or any school programs for African American children. It was automatically deemed as inferior or just not up to par. So I think that to answer that question, you really have to look at and understand like the societal ills, like the Black Lives Matter movement. How initially it starts off as this idea of bringing to the forefront that these are things that happen to African Americans on a regular basis, but then it being whitewashed to an extent and or taken to the extent of no, what you're saying is that no other lives matter, when that's not actually the case. So it lends itself more to institutionalized racism and social ideals, which kind of place minorities on the back burner. Thus, education for minorities is deemed as inferior and also placed on the back burner.
Okay, and do you think that the lack of media coverage on the lack of media coverage on the HBCU experience has influenced people's perceptions of these institutions?
Could you read that one more time?
Do you think that the lack of media coverage on the HBCU experience has influenced people's perceptions of the institutions?
I mean, so is it recent? I mean, because the reason I say that is because lack of media coverage. Like, I mean, granted, I don't watch television now as often as I used to.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even then, I very rarely, if ever, saw like media coverage specifically about universities outside of, okay, there's someone shooting from a bell tower, there's someone who's being, assaulted here or there, or various statistics that come out because of freshman orientation. It's like, that's, that sort of thing. And even then, that's not necessarily media coverage, but, it's not something that I see or recognize often enough to be able to say that, a lack of media coverage in general, does this. Now, do I feel that, it, in being named an HBCU versus what is considered like a PWI, in that particular realm, as far as like having its name put forth, yeah, I think there it suffers some disadvantages. It's almost as if they're speaking. Excuse me. It's almost as if the language is coded so that they're speaking to two very specific audiences while listing or using the exact same acronyms. HBCU usually speaks to a very specific community of individuals. PWI usually speaks to a separate, disparate community of individuals, who either seek to attend. So yes-ish, you might say.
Well, when you think lately in the not even lately in the media over the years, over time that you've known about HBCUs, even when you attended a HBCU, what have you seen what have you seen out there in the media portrayed about HBCUs, like on the news, the coverage that the universities get, even specifically if you want to talk about Jackson State University, the coverage that's being given from the news and different media outlets, CNN outlets like that report on HBCUs?
I think even then, in that particular area, I wouldn't necessarily be super informed. I mean, as far as recently, I haven't really seen, because again, yeah, I usually don't watch TV as much as I used to, so I don't really see a lot of things happening as far as like HBCUs being portrayed one way, and HBCU or PWIs being portrayed another. I mean, if we go further back when I actually watched television much more, years and years ago, effectively, um, it becomes, how are they portrayed, in different types of media. So in the news, there was always a separate list. Like, there would be the top 10 universities in America, and then the top 10 HBCUs in America. It almost as if, yeah, it's a university, and it's in America, but it's not necessarily what we're talking about when we have this image of a university in America. And it could just be, a matter of funding and not necessarily being able to compete on a national level. That could very much still be a thing. And then, of course, how it's portrayed in movies. What's that, Spike Lee, and School Days, the HBCU experience, some of which is eerily familiar and real. Like, so, I mean, and even then, that goes like beyond the idea of fraternity, or into these really interesting smaller aspects of, you run into that one student who thinks they know everything, but then ends up like getting into a philosophical argument with the dude at the KFC. Like, it's one of those situations. It's like you kind of see that happen at times. So, media portrayal in that sense, giving that particular language and its use to the distinction between like the top 10 in America versus the top 10 HBCUs in America. And then, it's portrayed by Spike Lee and several other individuals. I forgot the name of the directors, but there have been several other movies which kind of also capture that idea of what's supposed to be happening.
Drumline, Stomp the Yard.
Even those movies, I mean, but some of that stuff is true, of what college life is like. Some of it's just, I'm not saying that there aren't step teams who do that, but I mean, if all they had to focus on was the step teams, then they kind of missed the point of being in a fraternity in the first place. So, yeah, that sort of misconception as far as media, it certainly exists.
And you said that Spike Lee's School Days is, in a sense, it kind of shows some of, just a little bit, maybe just a little bit of the experience of that we might get at HBCU. What necessarily can you, other than the, like, having a philosophical conversation with someone, what other maybe experience from School Days could you pull out that you've experienced, or that we kind of experienced there, can we relate to there in that movie?
I think a lot of it is, much of what I remember, like I said, beyond the stuff that like deals with like the fraternities and the sororities, the difference in skin race from the wannabes and the jigaboos, I haven't really noticed that here. I think we kind of maybe not really got past, but I think for the most part nobody's really focusing on that unless it comes down to like jokes about what sorority you probably think you might want to be in. But I think the thing that stands out the most is the pomp and circumstance that they end up putting around like titles like Miss JSU and like the coronation. All of that seems like, yep, you just listed the playbook from what JSU does and or used to do. Good job, Spike Lee. That's just how it happens. Like, it seems like the most elaborate debutante ball in the world. I don't know why. It just seems to be the strangest thing. Like, oh, we still do this? Fantastic.
All right. Well, in Spike Lee, what point do you think he was really trying to make in that movie? Was it a positive portrayal of HBCUs, or was he actually trying to point out some issues? Because I know, if you've seen the movie, I've seen the movie, and they really you saw a little bit a little bit in there about the crisis that goes on with the university. They talk a little bit about the financials and things that go on that I think, and we still some people at HBCUs may still experience. Do you think that those portrayals are accurate, or what do you think his message really was in that movie pertaining to the universities, or even why do you think he even decided to create that movie and put that out there?
Well, I think that the movie in of itself, like they talk about the financials and how the university may as well be suffering, but how much time does that actually get in the movie compared to what's that? Compared to the hazing, compared to the football games, compared to the coronation, compared to the infighting between the wannabes and the jigaboos, compared to the the idea of this one guy believing that his education grants him some sort of extreme entitlement and the ability to talk down to others. So when you have how much time does that really get into the movie compared to all of those things that seem like really just surface things that you see at an HBCU? Like even here at Jackson, and then I'm sorry, but even when you take that into effect, and then at the very end, after all this stuff has transpired, Lawrence Fishburne apparently just stands in the middle of campus just yelling, "Wake up!" So it's the idea that you're looking at all of these very, very, very surface things that are good things to enjoy about the collegiate experience, but there is so much more that goes on behind the scenes that you don't necessarily understand or are not paying attention to, because these surface things tend to get in the way. Like, how much time do you actually remember them spending in class? Right.
None.
Thank you.
But do you think that maybe his point in that movie was to when he was saying wake up, do you think maybe they showed all these things and these things that the students are actually worried about in their college experience, and like, was he trying to say maybe that's not what's important?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of it. Those two things kind of correlate. Like, so you look at how much time they actually spend worrying about the financial of the university versus how much time they spend at the football games. How much time do you actually see them talking about, yeah, I just got out of class to do this, where it's like, yep, so you meeting up with the frat tonight. Hope you got that work done. Or, you're doing various other things that do not necessarily involve, like, the reason that you should probably be at college in the first place. So, and then all of a sudden the wake up is, it's sort of like, Spike Lee, kind of saying, you're looking at all of these surface things. You need to be paying attention to what's actually going on around you. You need to be at college. You need to be in college, in school, with purpose, with reason, not just to experience all the auxiliary things, but the reason you're there is to learn, is to educate yourself and to be educated, so that when you move on, you can make progress, so that the next generation can make progress, such and so forth, rather than saying like, yep, this year we lost the game, we're gonna win it again next year. Like, no, it's I think that's one of the more prominent messages that he's probably actually trying to send through that movie.
All right, and is there any other shows that you remember that might have depicted the experience in a sense, or focused on HBCUs?
That was this really terrible reality show,
College Hill.
That was it.
What do you think about College Hill? It's a scholarly article that I'm looking at for College Hill, and they've talked about how the show, in its first couple seasons, like the first 4 seasons, they focused on students at HBCU, the show, even though it had a lot of viewers, there were a lot of skeptics at HBCU that says that the show didn't really depict the experience, because they were focusing mainly on they had all their cast members had the so-called stereotypes of black people, the Jezebel,
that show was really terrible. Okay, so with College Hill, I think that College Hill works like most reality television works out. I guess the closest thing now would probably be the Kardashians, or Keeping Up with no, that's what that is, or the Real Housewives series. Most of the events that you see are absolutely scripted. They serve no real purpose other than to provide entertainment. And to look at those shows as an honest investment in the idea of what an HBCU experience is to deceive yourself. Like, you should pretty much be like, oh, okay, so it's just 7 people living in a house. So it's the real world at an HBCU. yeah, this is going to become mildly, if not incredibly, disappointing. So why am I putting this as like part of my expectation? This is not this is not what it's going to be.
What do you think putting that show being out there on air, and you know that these are African American students who not only attend college but they attend, most of them attend a black college. What do you think, if even at all, it maybe gave people an impression of what it's like at these universities? Whether it was the a negative impression, a positive impression, or even whether it wasn't even the correct.
I'm not even sure there were any positive impressions in this show. I think kind of the idea comes across that if you are self-aware enough to realize that this is not what an actual collegiate experience is like at an HBCU, it is a facet of it to some extent. Despite the hype and the drama, some of these things probably actually do happen. There will be infighting, there will be relationship disagreements, but the same can be said for any university. But when you put that on the screen and you say, yeah, it's at an HBCU, then the idea comes across as if, especially when you have these circumstances portrayed by people who are held in extremely stereotypical roles, then it sort of reinforces the idea. It's like, oh, that's what you do at HBCU. Guess I won't be attending there. Or, yeah, this is why I went to a PWI, because this actually happens. Now, I'm pretty sure that because that show aired, and I'm, I may be right, I may be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that because like any one of those shows aired, the university at which it aired probably lost some people because of the exposure. But I'm almost just as certain that there were students who came to that HBCU specifically because it was being shot there. So I guess it's more so the idea that it speaks to the individual or a particular train of thought than it does to very specifically relegated populations.
There was a show that came on MTV a couple years ago, College Life. I can't remember the exact name right now, but that show almost they show students at different universities. They were all basically PWIs, and they were attending maybe University of Arizona State, which is a party school, and just different universities. They would just show, each episode would have like students going to this university, we following a student for that whole semester. And that show, you saw them partying, drinking, fighting, arguing, things like that. Some of them even decided to drop out. But even though the show lasted one season, even though it still didn't get great reviews. It wasn't looked at so hard as College Hill was looked at,
Right.
And wasn't considered. And if you can say they didn't put as much pressure on that show as they did College Hill, and give it so much negative press like they did that show. So what do you think the difference was?
So first, you said that. Okay, so you said that this was a variety of students, right?
At different
by race, by demographic, by university. So it wasn't just HBCUs; it was also PWIs in the mix, right?
Yeah, that was PWIs. That show did not on MTV did not have really any HBCUs at all. Had students of different ethnicities at different universities, and each episode would feature a new student at a university, following them for the semester.
I mean, well, I think it's also kind of like when you think of College Hill, and you think about it being these students who are just apparently being students, quote unquote, at an HBCU. People don't necessarily show it because they want insight into what it's like to go to an HBCU. People look at it because they're into the spectacle of what they think that it might be like to go to an HBCU. I mean, in that instance, yeah, you had students who were from HBCUs and PWIs on the other show, but that probably gave a more genuine insight. Like I said, all of these things happen. Like, ASU is a party school. People drink and fight at any university, regardless of what happens. But the idea that this was happening specifically at an HBCU with students who were attending the HBCU, all living in a house together and all playing up these particular stereotypes, then yeah, you're showing up for the spectacle of what you think might actually happen, rather than, oh, okay, this might be an honest interpretation or look at what actually might be happening at this university.
All right, and I know you said earlier that when we were talking about PWIs, HBCUs, and the media, that they both get put in the media about things that's going on there. But when you see HBCUs in the media, a lot of times they're focusing on are these why are these universities still here? Is this another form of segregation, or even or they're talking about the financial well-being of the university and how the universities are struggling. But when you see PWIs in the news, maybe you'll see something about their fraternity on campus, but you don't really see anything that negative at these universities other than maybe a shooting. But anything of that negative as what they always talk about with HBCUs, but you barely see any positive press in the sense. So what do you think the difference is between HBCUs just focusing on HBCUs and the struggles that may be going on with that institution rather than doing the same to PWI? Because how often do you see or you hear about that at a PWI?
How often I hear about it? I want to say, well, within the last few years, maybe the most, the biggest thing that I heard of with a PWI was the fraternity on the bus. It apparently had this chant that they had, using various words that are better not used at all, or at least not within the confines of a recording space or like a polite society. But yeah, I think that was the largest thing that I heard, and it becomes all of a sudden it's like, yeah, so they apologized, it's fine. But if you think about it, if that had been the other way around, right? If these had been black students who were saying disparaging things about, I don't know, any other race or specifically like white people, would the media have been so quick to let that go? Like, I very rarely, if ever, hear about that now. There are things that happened, like, I suppose, many years ago that I still hear about happening, specifically either with African Americans or with, like, groups of African Americans. Even with, like, fraternities. I guess it's because I I don't. You tend to notice the things that you tend to be closest to. I know a bunch of people who happen to be in fraternities. So you turn on the news at one point and it says, yeah, so down in Florida, this fraternity has had this happen, or someone on JSU campus has been affected by that. You tend to notice it more. But I think I might have actually gotten kind of away from the question that you were kind of asking initially. But yeah, I mean, other than the idea that it's just you report on it because it's bad news and you kind of expect it to happen, so it reinforces again certain ideas and stereotypes. Like, okay, so what's happening in the black world, and how can we exploit that to garner views? No, I guess that might be an answer. Maybe not the most exacting.
That is, but that's your answer. So, do you think
Nice.
that do you think that desegregation has had a negative influence on the culture and growth of HBCUs?
Desegregation as a means of, as a negative means, or as a negative effect on culture and growth of HBCUs. I don't think so. I don't think that well, I'm sorry. I don't think that desegregation has a negative effect on the growth of HBCUs. I mean, that effectively invites, um, and not just African Americans, but also various populations. I mean, if you look at the population of JSU, it's really boomed within the last 3 or 4 years, and a lot of that probably comes not just from the increased press that JSU receives on certain accounts, or its new innovations in the STEMs. Certainly not in liberal arts, but but you know a lot of that comes also from like international students. Like we tend to get a lot of students here, not just from China, but also from India, also from uh, various parts of Europe, Eastern and Western. Um, Definitely Russian, Romanian, Yugoslavian, and I know that we have several German students here as well. So it's a lot of just, it's a lot of additional people coming in. And so desegregation has probably actually helped JSU in several instances, rather than being, completely attributed toward its demise.
Well, on that, do you think that a lot of people when they decide to come to the HBCU, a lot of times they're coming for what they heard, what they've seen on television about HBCUs, or what they, or even like I said, what they heard or the experience that they want. So they want that HBCU and Black college experience. So if they're opening their doors and they're desegregating, they're letting more of other nationalities, other races, other ethnicities into the university, and the university starts to, they're having more pops of color, and I guess you can say in this case, do you think that that will be taken away from that experience at all?
I don't think that it changes the foundation of the university in of itself. It nor does it necessarily have to change the mission of the university. I mean, so
So you think they would still be a sort of like college, and you would still have that experience?
I think again, I don't think it necessarily changes its foundation. It just changes its makeup. It was founded Jackson State in of itself, and all HBCUs were founded as effectively HBCUs. So that's not something that can necessarily be taken away. You can't just like, yeah, Jackson State University, such and so forth. Just it is an HBCU. It can't really just not be an HBCU until it just continues to not exist, one would assume. So, does it take away what it is in its essence? No. Does it maybe change its perception to individuals, to other groups of people? Probably. Because, if you're looking for that particular kind of experience, then is that the only reason that you went to an HBCU? Is because you saw College Hill, or because like someone's like, yeah, we turn up on a regular. So, is that, so why are you there in that particular instance? So again, does it change what it was founded as and what it is? No. Does it change its makeup? Certainly.
All right. Well, have you ever heard of anything called the Cosby effect in a sense?
I'm going to need you to explain this one because Cosby effect. This is sounding awesome. I would assume this has more to do with the perception of Bill Cosby in very
Well,
specific instances. So it's like you see his like television persona and you tend to confuse it with his real life persona. Would that be something akin to what the Cosby effect is?
No, the Cosby effect is it's the Cosby effect. The term really came up in a scholarly article from a couple professors at Howard University, and the Cosby effect is basically the what's the best way to explain it? It's basically his shows, The Cosby Show, and his spinoff from The Cosby Show, A Different World. How these shows they promoted, they basically promoted and put the experience out there of HBCUs and the positive outlooks on The Cosby Show. They really talk about college a lot of times in the show, and even if they didn't necessarily think you had the Howard shirt on or the Xavier shirt on, and they were really talking about college. And this is, and really, they said that the show and both shows really drove kids to go to college, and A Different World really drove a lot of people to want to attend HBCU. Specifically, when they were younger, I want to send him to college, but they tried to send him in college, but they decided to go to HBCU instead for that experience and for that vibe that Bill Cosby was able to put on about these universities. So, do you think that? And then they also say that his show made leeway for other shows to come out about HBCUs as well as even other black sitcoms like Martin. After a while, when his show came out, he was wearing apparel from HBCUs, and other shows did the same thing and took that focus and really drove kids at that time to go to college, especially HBCUs more specifically. What do you think about those shows, Cosby Show and A Different World, and their relation to the HBCU experience and their form of media coverage and having kids attend college?
So okay, so the shows themselves having a positive effect on.
Do you think they had a positive effect on highlighting historically black colleges?
Probably on the student populations for the time that it was in effect, because any increase at any college is typically seen as a positive thing. Like, yeah, we had greater student enrollment. People see that as a positive thing. But then once you get down to the personal level, you're like, so why is this?
All right, and to continue.
Okay, so sorry about that, but I think it was where I left off. I was talking about how all of a sudden like greater student enrollment is usually a positive thing. But then you have to consider like why people enroll. If it's specifically for looking, for that HBCU experience, is it for looking to get caught up in whatever drama a different world had in its place? Are you gonna find that one friend who's just always hanging around, who apparently keeps a line on a high top fade? Is everybody looking for their Whitley? Is that is that kind of what's going on? I mean, if that's why you showed up, then I don't know if I'm not saying that you shouldn't be there, but you may need to reevaluate what it is that you're actually looking for from not just an HBCU experience, but from a collegiate experience in general.
What do you think A Different World was able to properly project what students experience at these universities, or was it just?
I mean, it it projected a facet of activities that occur at just about any university, not necessarily specifically HBCUs. I mean, people do um, people do develop relationships either with like really good friends or with significant others. At college, people fail, people drop out, people have part-time jobs. People are not necessarily in the best of health at all times, and that can kind of affect certain things. People are happy, people are depressed. All these things are situations that occur within a different world, and these are also very real situations that happen to tons of people. It may not all happen to the same group of people, but it certainly happens to like various individuals. I mean, the idea of like Dwayne Wayne is like put there for you to just project yourself onto, and all of a sudden you're the cool guy talking to everybody with flip shades.
All right. Has attending a historically black college and university increase cultivated an increase of pride and self esteem in you?
That's a leading question. Like, did Jackson State make you feel good about yourself? I don't know. It's closer to like a love hate relationship.
And why is
It's
that?
like all of a sudden it's like you went to JSU, so anytime you're a part of an organization or a college or a school, your sense of pride kind of just goes with it. It's like, okay, so I went to JSU, I am ride or die for JSU. I might say disparaging things about JSU at times, but that's because I'm talking to other people from JSU who may have had similar experiences. Like everybody knows about that line in BF Roberts the first 2 weeks that you get here. So everybody knows that parking is not necessarily what it should be. Everybody like probably thinks that the administration is messing up because they don't feel them to be making proper decisions in any case. Yeah, I mean that's what it is. Now you get me talking to somebody from any other school. Yeah, no, JSU is gonna be number one all day, every day. I don't care what your school is. It's just how
Can't
it's gonna
talk
work.
bad about my school.
Right. But when I'm talking to other people who understand my struggle from JSU, it's like, man, I'm questioning my decision to go to JSU. It becomes that entire idea. So yeah, it cultivates this idea of a love-hate relationship with the JSU. Just as many. I probably had 3 or 4 times as many good times or even days at JSU than I've just had days where I'm like, I could really do without this university. It becomes that sort of situation.
Well, do you feel as though since you've been here that you've grown any maybe some of the faculty or anything or organizations that you're part of or something at this institution that you don't feel that maybe you wouldn't have got that same experience at any other institution, for example, maybe that helped shape who you are today in any sense?
Well, I think and just I don't want to give the cop out answer, but you just go with me on this one. So it's more so the idea that any student could probably say that about any university. Because, like I said in the very beginning, I haven't been to any other universities. So I can't say that, yeah, my experience would have been different at Dillard. My experience would have been different at Duke. My experience would have been different at, Southern. or Texas A&M, or Wake Forest, Stanford. I can't say that about any of those colleges because I've not been to them. My only experience thus far has been at Jackson State. Now, I mean, and the people I met, and at the time that I was here, that's literally, and for that to happen anywhere else would take something close to beyond astronomical odds. Like the friends that I've made here, the people that I've met who have greatly influenced my life, for better or for worse, in certain instances, you know, um, the professors that I've met who've always been like, look, you have great potential, but I'm actually going to need you to do some work. Actually calling me out on being lazy. I don't know if that would, that might have happened at other universities. I know that it happened here. It may have happened elsewhere, but I know that it happened here. It might have happened elsewhere, I should say, but I know that it happened here. So, I mean, in my personal experience, like, yeah, I'm at Jackson State University. This is kind of where I am. I'm at HBCU. I may be able to attribute many of the experiences that I've had here to simply being at an HBCU and the rallying around. I mean, well, certain other things like rallying around your band or your football team are not unique to HBCUs, but maybe the way in which it is done.
And always football team here.
Mm, maybe the way in which it is done might be different from other places, but I could not necessarily say.
All right. Well, then, your for your experience, like, what have you been involved in at JSU? Organizations, anything to help to build, enhance your experience,
Enhance my experience,
or even just things you were involved in that maybe.
Let's see. I had a brief stint in the history club. That was good times, and that was way back when I was an undergrad. Um, let's see. What else was there? Well, being a part of the Richard Wright Center staff is always a plus. Um, that's been an interesting experience since my grad years. Then for a brief minute, I was also on the Honda Challenge team. You know, getting to actually meet like other people who just knew rapid facts. And in undergrad, I also joined a fraternity during my junior year.
And do you think you would have maybe considered doing that if you did not go to HBCU?
So would I have considered joining a fraternity at all?
Mm-hmm.
Possibly, but I definitely know that there would be a chance that had I attended a PWI, then the fraternity that I did join may not have actually been at that particular university or institution. It's not a staple. Greek life at HBCUs seems to be a little different than it is, different than it is perceived through the media, but not altogether different from what you would see in those at PWIs. The same sort of camaraderie and fraternalism that you actually see is the same in very specific instances.
Understandable. And do you believe that historically black colleges and universities are still relevant today?
Relevant. What do you mean by relevant?
Well, do you think there's still a need for them? Do you think they still have a place here? Or should they just maybe even, or not be HBCUs anymore, just be a regular university?
I don't know if I would necessarily support the idea of it not being a regular university. As much of a distinction as I probably have not necessarily made between PWIs and HBCUs or their importance to whatever groups of people end up having to or end up willing to interact with them. I think that despite the fact that it is occasionally regarded as a 13th grade, HBCUs, but specifically JSU, being held as an HBU, celebrated as an HBU, as a part of a greater experience regarding blacks and African Americans is really important. And in times where it becomes like this real interesting phenomenon to kind of lose yourself to a variety of identities, having like something that remains fairly constant despite its changing demographic makeup, you know, is something to hold on to. Keeps it relevant, makes it something that is, good in a variety of instances. So yeah, I still think that on a whole, HBCUs and that particular distinction are relevant today.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, sir. I appreciate you doing this interview.
Not a problem.
We shake your hand. Thank you.
Certainly.
Is there anything else you would like to add, or is that?
No, I think that's it.
All right.